Hello, everyone, and welcome back to JDD TV. I'm joined today by a very special guest. We have Pete coming on from 11 Yanks, and we're going to talk a little bit about Jesse Marsch and take a look at the American fan perspective. So, Pete, first things first, how you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. It's been a while.
It has been. I think this is the very first time you've been actually on my channel. I've featured
That's true.
on yours quite a
come to mind many times.
Many times for our CONCACAF council. So don't know when the next.
We'll have one coming up before Copa America, hopefully. So
beautiful. I'm curious to see it. It's a forever changing council. It seems like, but I mean, you, myself, and JD, I think are and Eddie are the usual suspects.
Eddie, yeah.
And Eddie,
four of us, pretty consistent.
Pretty
the
consistent.
Mexico correspondent will probably have to change again, but the four of us have been pretty consistent. So
beautiful. I'm looking forward to it. But Pete, I brought you here today because I mean it's been a little bit, so you've had some time to soak in the fact that Jesse Marsch is Canada's new coach. So just first things first, what was your initial reaction when you saw Canada hire Jesse? Because I think I saw you tweet about it, and I think you were relatively positive.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think this is a marriage made in heaven. Might be a little over the top, but when I saw the news, I thought good for Canada, because there's been a lot of uncertainty right now with the Federation and then John Herdman leaving. And it was like, well, who's going to take charge? And honestly, I didn't think they could afford Jesse, but then obviously we heard the news that some of the Canadian MLS clubs are chipping in to pay his salary. And yeah, I mean, I think I have so many thoughts about this, but I'd say overall, I think, his weaknesses aside, which he does have, I think overall this is really good for Canada and also good for Jesse.
Now, I was pushing quite a bit for Jesse Marsch. I've talked about him a lot just through the rumors I've heard and the fact that I think he was going to be a fit. And looking at some of the other candidates that were out there, I thought that Jesse was the best fit. I just full stop. I thought he was. I love the fact that he's got a connection to Canada from coaching the Impact back in the day. He wanted the job back in 2012. So, because a lot of the Canadian fans are like, well, he's American. I'm like, that shouldn't matter. We are rivals, but it's not like the Mexican manager is now American or vice versa. Like Jesse has a connection to the country. He's definitely familiar with the player pool, and he wanted this job back when our player pool back in 2012 was a lot different than it is now. I know he's had some ups and downs. I'm hoping that he can learn from them and come into this team. But I do want to focus a little bit on the fact that, like I said, he's American. So what do you think the American fan perspective was from your guys', your Twitter feed? What did you see that day when Jesse came up? Because I saw a lot of, we didn't want him anyways. Then I saw a lot of good for Canada. Like that's a big pull. So how did you gauge it? Your thumbs on the pulse. What did you think?
So, I mean, for a while I was a big fan of Jesse and what he was doing over in Europe. It hasn't quite gone according to plan. Jesse, at the end of the day, is a systems manager. He is completely 100% deeply and fully committed to his style of play. And for my opinion, that would not suit the U.S. player pool right now, particularly considering a lot of the players we have, especially in midfield, guys like Giovanni Reyna, Christian Pulisic, even a Ricardo Pepi. They're not. He loves to press, and these guys are not going to be pressing merchants. And my worry was if Jesse ever got the job, that's what would happen. And I don't think he suits our pool. I also have issues with some of Jesse's tendency to be very, very stubborn about his style of play and his unwillingness to change. It's probably the biggest, I would say, negative mark against him. So most American fans at this are at the point where we didn't want Jesse. Although we're stuck with Greg. So it's sort of like, you know what I mean? My big worry was like, people were saying, well, if we flop at Copa America, we might get rid of Greg. And I'm like, well, yeah, but then we might hire Jesse. Now there's no worry about that happening. So it's like, okay. And that's not to say that Jesse's a bad coach or that, he's America's sloppy seconds. I think that Jesse's a very inspirationalist guy, similar to John Herdman, right? Like John Herdman really knew how to get players to run through a brick wall. And I think Jesse's very similar in that way. I just think the American perspective is we don't want him coaching us. We believe that it's not a good fit, but he's still a good coach for the right team. And I think Canada is that team.
Now, the nice thing about this Canada roster is the fact that it is made up of very athletic players that know how to press. Jonathan David is one of the best pressing strikers in the game. You have even players coming from Major League Soccer who can maybe have a big look under him, like a Chouanier. Kone can press. You have athletic players like Buchanan and Davies, like you said, like this pool could potentially fit this side. He's got a lot of work to do. There's some big question marks around what that back four could look like. And this is kind of where I'm going to go with the next question, is because he was on Jimmy Conrad's podcast. Obviously, he was a part of it, so it was kind of like the goodbye. And the number one thing I took away from that was one, that Davies will be playing higher up the pitch, not left back. He wants him to be like a left attacking mid, left mid, depending on what system he plays. He also highlighted two players, Kyle Hebert and Babito, who play for the Rapids and St. Louis, and they play in that Red Bull philosophy. So naturally, when you're coming into a new system and you're bringing those Red Bull traits, not very easy to do. It's great having options that basically can play in that role and know what to do in the Red Bull style, which is why Hebert and Bombito, I think, can be two big players for this national team going forward under Jesse, because they know his style. So my question to you is as I said, like, he's already seems like he's looking at Red Bull style players. He might have the nice fit. The biggest question mark I had around some of the Canadian fans was, does Jesse have a plan B? You watched a lot of leads. Painfully, you watched a lot of leads. What would you say to that? Do you think that if things go like if these two friendlies coming up against Netherlands and France, we're playing, two teams that probably will have more of the ball. I don't know how Jesse's going to adapt to his style. It's his first couple games. You don't want to be too harsh on him, but what do you think Jesse's ability is to have a plan B?
Well, the short answer is no. I mean, we've never seen him have a plan B in his life. Like, I don't remember his Montreal days, so I can't speak to that. But from the Red Bulls to Salzburg to Leipzig to Leeds, there was never a plan B. And he has openly admitted that he is a disciple. He even called himself a company man as far as the Red Bull system goes. And what's funny about that is that even the Red Bulls have moved on from that system, and kind of, Nagelsmann had a big part in changing the way that Leipzig played and making it more modern and more successful, rather than being so reliant on the pressing 4-2-2-2 system or 4-4-2, however you want to look at it. The problem is, Jesse said, and this was really worrying to me about him taking over the U.S. men's national team. He said, when I got to Leipzig, I knew right away my system wasn't going to work, because things had changed, the personnel had changed, the style had changed, and yet he did it anyway, and it flopped spectacularly. He was out in 2 months. And then we saw the same thing at Leeds. And so, yeah, I think if there is anything to criticize about Jesse Marsch and to worry about, it's the lack of a plan B, But I will say, for Canada, if it's working, again, if it is working, you may not need a plan B as often. And maybe that will come back to bite him further down the line. But I will say, if you look at his record everywhere he goes, he's almost always a success at the beginning. And one thing I don't think we give Jesse enough credit for is that he's a very inspirationalist coach, and he really is good with his man management and players, and he knows how to get players fired up, because you have to play that system. Like, you can't run that much and with that much intensity unless you are fired up, and Jesse's good at that. And so I'm actually I'm super interested in watching Canada at Copa America, because I think that it's, a breath of fresh air, right? They got this guy, there was a lot of instability in the federation and the coach and the financial situation. But now if Jesse feels like a uniting force, and something that I think Canadian fans can get excited about and should be excited about. And I will say too, yes, his system is all about pressing, but you have 4 to 5 really quality players in that team that kind of are the bow on top of the present, because you're pressing, but then when you win the ball, you need to be able to do something with it, right? And that's where your quality needs to shine through. But if you have Eustachio, Davies, David, Buchanan, even to a degree Kone, I think they have the quality to really hurt teams once they do get that ball, particularly in transition. Like you said, they're athletic players too. They're quick. Like, Alphonso Davies is supremely technical, but what an athlete as well. So I could not think of a realistic, better coach for Canada than Jesse Marsch. And like you said earlier, he's American, but Canada and America are relatively new rivals, right? It's only been a few years. Like, we would never hire a Mexican coach, and Mexico would never hire an American coach, but that rivalry goes back 30, 40 years, or at least 30. So it's a little bit different, and I'd love to take John Herdman for our national team, even though he's English and we don't love the English. A good coach is a good coach, and what he did with Canada and with the resources that is remarkable. And I know that the World Cup didn't quite go according to plan, but other than that, it's hard to really criticize John Herdman for everything else he did for that program. The one thing I will say, and I know you referenced Bombito, who's a center back within the Colorado Rapid system, is one of the big weaknesses about Jesse's pressing system is that he likes to play a very high line. And it is very much dependent on what he calls, man-to-man pressing, right? Where basically everybody takes one and it's their job. And the problem with that system is if it breaks down on one guy, then the whole thing breaks down. Because once one guy, if one guy can gets beat, now it's like, well, who's covering him? Well, not me. I've got my guy. And so then it creates a confusion. We saw this at Leeds many times. If it would break down in the initial press, then it was 2 to 3 seconds before the other team was down the other end of the field. And his teams are so vulnerable in transition. So that is going to be interesting to watch because I don't think Canada has the fastest center backs in the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how he handles that. Because, what's interesting about it too is that against really quality teams, I think it actually works better because they want to play out of the back and they want to play through midfield. So you actually have a better chance to win the ball high up the field. Sometimes against teams that's how he got to beat Chelsea and Liverpool in the Premier League. But then sometimes against teams that were similar levels to him, the teams wouldn't try to play all the time through the back. They would just go, okay, well, let's just bypass this press. And oftentimes his defense, his back line would be caught flat-footed and caught out. And there's a lot of errors and it was a big, big problem. So I'm fascinated to see how he handles that with Canada because I know Bombito plays that way under his protege, Chris Armas in Colorado. Yeah. But doing that against MLS attacks is also different against doing it against like an Argentina or like, Netherlands or something. So I'm really fascinated to see how that's going to work.
I am too. Like you said, you made a bunch of great points and the players you highlighted as well. All like the midfield three of Akone, Chouanier, Eustachio winning the ball and then countering. That's how they're going to play. The high line was the biggest question mark I had. And you spoke to it a little bit, which is interesting because Bombito has been clocked in as the fastest center back in Major League Soccer, maybe the fastest player. I can't remember off the top of my head. So that's why I was highlighting him because one, he is fast. He's proven fast and he's under Chris Armas. He's in that Red Bull style. So I think he will become probably our most important center back going forward. And I think that's why Jesse already highlighted him. How is it going to be executed? I don't know. But the fact that he mentioned him and Hebert, it just seems like that might be the center back pairing. It leaves out someone like Derek Cornelius and a couple other players that are playing over in Europe because it's looking like he's looking for someone who knows how to play under his system. So it's tricky too because you got Netherlands, France, Argentina, and that gauntlet to lead off his first 3 matches. So he's going to learn a lot out of it. He really is. And then you go into the Peru and Chile, and obviously those are probably the 2 matches we're looking at for an opportunity to make it out of the group. So I'm really excited to see what Jesse can do. I do think I'm over the moon that we got him in, especially like you talked about the money situation. I didn't know where it was coming from. I like that he was the guy. There's some other options out there that I didn't think were a fit. So it'll be good. And then for the Canadians out there that were wondering, again, just to finish off, Pete, I'm going to let you talk on a little story here. There's a little beef going on between Jesse and maybe the U.S. Federation, Greg Berhalter. Do you want to allow the Canadian fans to know? Because I've had a lot of questions around it, and I knew I was doing this with you at some point, so I wanted to save it for you. So for any Canadian fans who are out there who are a little upset, maybe forget that, the recency bias that, we are rivals now. We're definitely growing rivals. We have not been rivals for a very long time. So this is a big part of it. This is why I don't think it's that big a deal that Jesse's coming in because we're not historical rivals, but also he's got some beef with the Federation and Greg. So give us a story, Pete. Why is that?
So, yeah, I think it's less to do with Greg and more to do with the Federation. So when we rehired Berhalter, it was a sham hiring process. Everybody who's not mainstream media in soccer community in America knows this. And the interviews conducted by this weirdo, Matt Crocker, were bizarre interviews, like mental tests. Jesse probably signed an NDA, so he couldn't say too much, but he referenced on his podcast that what he was on with CBS, that he sort of hinted that he had a 36-hour interview locked in a hotel room with Matt Crocker, which is just one of the weirdest things I've ever heard in a professional sports organization. Like, what are you doing? And I think he felt like he never actually had a realistic chance to get the job because the Federation was intent on hiring Berhalter, which he's not wrong, because even if you listen to what Matt Crocker said, the criteria for the battery of tests that they put coaching candidates through was set by the criteria set in Berhalter's time in charge. So basically, the question was, are you Greg Berhalter? And if the answer is no, then you're not a great fit for this job. It was a sham process. For all of the, bankruptcy issues that Canada's having at the moment, the U.S. Federation might seem better because we have a better player pool right now. But the people running the game in our country are absolute morons, and I have no problem saying that publicly. And so Jesse felt slighted, and he felt like, okay, I didn't get the job, but not only did I didn't get the job on merit, I didn't get the job because it was all a sham process and you were going to hire Berhalter from the beginning. And he probably also felt like the 30s, the weird, criteria and the way, the hiring process, it was just all very, very strange. And so I think he felt a bit like he's bitter, there's definitely some, now he's going to have a chip on his shoulder every time he faces the U.S. Like, I really want to beat them to show U.S. soccer what they missed out on. So you're going to have a very, and not just when he plays the U.S., but I think, you're our next door neighbors. If Canada outperforms us in Copa America, which, by the way, could easily happen because you've got a much easier path to the semifinal than we do, right? Like, we could probably get out of our group, I hope. But then we've got either Brazil or Colombia, and I don't trust Greg to figure out how to beat one of those guys. Whereas you guys, outside of Argentina, your group, I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion, but you can get out of that group, right? And then aren't you matched up with the Mexico-Jamaica group? So, any of those teams are beatable. It's not a guarantee, but they're doable. And all of a sudden, before you know it, Canada could be in the semifinal. And even if they don't win that game, they still get another shot at third place. And with a new coach and the positivity that's going to surround this team going into the tournament, there's a good chance that like Jesse Marsch could finish above Greg Berhalter in the, Copa America. But more on the Greg Berhalter beef, it had to do with Giovanni Reyna, right? Yep. And on his podcast, Reyna was called into, the national team despite struggling at Nottingham Forest. And Jesse Marsch alluded to the only reason he was being called in was that, Greg has to call him in because of the beef they had during the World Cup, and it would cause drama if he didn't get called in, which is actually nonsense because Gio Reyna has been one of our best two players since the World Cup, him and Pulisic together. And, him finally being played centrally, which I advocated for years, has really unlocked him as a talent for the national team. Whatever's going on with his club, he has been delivering for the national team, and his inclusion on the roster and even in the starting lineup speaks for itself. So Jesse was kind of asking the question, and he seemed to indicate that he might not bring Gio if he were coach. And then Greg responded I think after the Jamaica game where Gio came on and got 2 assists, basically suggesting that Jesse Marsch was wrong to question Gio Reyna's inclusion. So
unprovoked, right? Didn't he bring that up out of in that?
Yeah, he brought it up. He was like, I heard somebody said... Yeah. In classic Greg Berhalter fashion, even when he tries to troll or it just always comes across as weird and awkward. But yeah, so I don't know how bad the beef goes. I think Jesse feels like Greg shouldn't have the job. He famously had a tweet during the World Cup qualifying, or not a tweet. He liked a tweet saying that Greg Berhalter was ruining this generation of American players and then had to apologize for it and retract it later. So I think Jesse feels, like many fans do, that Greg Berhalter should not be coaching our national team. And I think he's going to want to try to prove to U.S. soccer what they missed out on as he takes Canada. And as much as it hurts to say, Canada's going to benefit from that,
Yep. No, I 100% agree. And I just wanted the Canadian fans to understand a little bit of that as well, because, a chip on the shoulder is the number one way to put it. He's coming into, I think, the program at the right time. He's got a lot to prove. I don't know how Copa America is going to go, but he's playing with house money because those first 3 games are a gauntlet. He's got 2 to really prove himself to try to get out of the group, and we'll see what happens. And then again, when we play the Americans, you guys have gotten the better out of us pretty much ever since the World Cup qualifying. And this would be nice to maybe get one back over in you guys and Jesse Marsch leading the way. I've also heard that, I know he's a very well-spoken man. And I've heard he's done a really good job right now reaching out to the team, having conversations, and just like you mentioned, the way he can connect with players will go a long way. So I'm excited to see how the players buy into the system as well. It'll be interesting to see. We have those matches coming up in a little over a week's time. So we'll have a look at Jesse Marsch's first couple matches and obviously heading into Copa America. So Pete, I really appreciate you coming on today, giving us that insight there. Seems from the American side of view, seems like they, I guess, maybe are a little worried, how Canada will do with Jesse Marsch, but are ultimately...
Yeah, I'll say real quick, this is good for the U.S., right? Because winning 4 out of the last 5 domestic trophies was not good for our program. It's not good for our region. We need more quality. We need Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., and hopefully Jamaica, to all be good and for those games to really matter. it feels right now like the US has the upper hand in a lot of these knockout tournament games. So Jesse going to Canada is a good thing for the US because it will make Canada better. And we need that in this region. We need more good quality teams, especially going into 2026.
Absolutely. And I've learned one thing of dealing with you, Pete. You're always pro CONCACAF. You know, you always obviously want the Americans to win, just like I want the Canadians to win, but we want our region to grow in general, and getting better coaches in, hopefully developing better players will definitely do that for Canada, which will then obviously help the Americans and everyone else as well. So Pete, I appreciate the time, my man. It was great catching up with you, and hopefully you guys did enjoy this episode. And if you did, as always, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub. See you guys soon. Cheers, friends.